Have you ever looked at someone and thought, he's the last person who would do something like that? That was Robert Philip Hanssen. Born April 18, 1944, in Chicago, Illinois, to a conservative, working-class family, Robert was the only child of Howard and Vivian Hanssen. His father, a tough Chicago cop, ruled the household with discipline, harsh, cold, and often cruel. He demanded perfection. And from a young age, Robert learned how to hide things, how to suppress, not express, how to survive. He was awkward, introverted, and didn't make friends easily. But he was brilliant, obsessed with technology, driven by the idea of importance. He watched his father wear a badge and command fear, and somewhere along the line, Robert began dreaming of something more, something powerful, but quieter. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charming, but he was sharp. He studied chemistry at Knox College, then pivoted to business. Later, he earned an MBA in accounting and a master's degree in systems analysis. But the world of finance never held his attention the way secrecy did. In 1976, he joined the FBI. That's when the real story begins. Assigned to the Bureau's field office in Gary, Indiana, Hanssen didn't exactly stand out. But he took everything in. He studied procedures, people, protocol. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the kind of guy you suspected. Eventually he was transferred to New York and later Washington, D.C. It was there, inside the Bureau's most elite quarters, that Hanssen found his true playground, counterintelligence. He worked in the division responsible for identifying and stopping foreign spies. Irony of ironies. By day, he was the hunter. But deep inside, the itch had started. The same itch that had lived in him since childhood. The desire to be smarter than the system. More powerful than those in charge. Untouchable. In 1979, that itch became action. That year, Hanssen walked into the Soviet GRU's radar, without being recruited. Without pressure. He volunteered. He believed the US was arrogant. That its intelligence structure was riddled with flaws. But he didn't betray the country out of ideology. It wasn't politics that moved him, it was ego. He wanted to prove he could do it and never be caught. While his FBI badge sat in his pocket, he began writing letters to Soviet agents, offering information, suggesting safe drop points, making deals. He never used his real name. He signed them Raymond Garcia. At home, things seemed picture perfect. He was a devout Catholic, a father of 6. He attended Latin Mass, led family prayers. He even joined Opus Dei, a strict religious organization that preached penance, structure, and purity. But beneath the surface, two Roberts were forming. There was Hanssen, the family man who wore thick glasses, drove a station wagon, and taught his kids about heaven and hell. Then there was Hanssen, the spy who passed encrypted documents, exposed covert agents, and watched innocent men die because of what he shared. And no one suspected a thing. His wife Bonnie believed he was doing consulting work for the church. His colleagues thought he was socially awkward but competent. He had no flashy purchases, no late-night partying, no signs of sudden wealth. Instead, he lived modestly in suburban Vienna, Virginia, mowed his lawn, paid his taxes. But the reality? He had begun feeding the Soviets some of the most guarded secrets of the United States. Not for millions, not for fame. Just to see if he could. This is not just a story of espionage, it's a story of masks. The man who knelt in church on Sunday and leaked nuclear strategies on Monday. The neighbor who waved politely and sent operatives to their deaths in silence. Robert Hanssen's double life had just begun, and it was only a matter of time before the bodies started piling up. By 1979, while the rest of the Bureau was tightening its belt for the Cold War, Robert Hanssen was already loosening the threads. That year, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. and handed over a package. Inside it, names, operations, real people with real families now dangling like puppets, their strings suddenly in enemy hands. He didn't wait to be recruited. He offered his services to the Soviets, to America's #1 adversary. In exchange, he asked for money, but not much. Not at first. $20,000 here, $30,000 there. He claimed it was for his children's Catholic school fees, but truthfully, he just liked knowing he could do it. The thrill, the game, the feeling of control. And the Soviets, they were stunned. They hadn't asked for him. But suddenly, they had a man on the inside of the FBI's most sensitive department, a ghost in the machine. And he wasn't just feeding them scraps, he was feeding them everything. Names of double agents, counter-surveillance tactics, locations of top-secret tunnels dug beneath Soviet embassies in D.C. One of his first betrayals was a man named Dmitry Polyakov, a high-ranking Soviet general who had secretly worked with U.S. intelligence for over 2 decades. Known in the CIA as Top Hat, Polyakov had supplied some of the most crucial intel about Soviet operations during the Cold War. Hanssen revealed him. Shortly after, Polyakov was recalled to Moscow, tried in secret, and executed, gone. Just like that, because of one betrayal. And Hanssen? He didn't blink. He wasn't chaotic, he was careful. Every dead drop was meticulously planned. He used remote parks, trails, and even placed signals like a strip of white tape on a signpost to indicate a drop was ready. He never met with Soviet agents directly. Only exchanged packages. Never spoke on the phone. Always stayed in the shadows. But still, he blended in. Back at work, he kept his head down. If he overheard chatter about foreign intelligence leaks, he offered bland opinions. If the FBI started poking too close, he would lie low, wait months, even years, then strike again. Between 1985 and 1990, what the FBI would later call the golden years of betrayal, Hanssen gave away enough information to cripple U.S. intelligence operations for decades. He told the Soviets how America tracked their satellites, how the NSA intercepted communications, how the CIA planted agents in Moscow. He even revealed the identities of 2 key Russian double agents, Valery Martinov and Sergei Motorin. Both were executed, shot in the back of the head. And still, Hanssen carried on with his daily life. Every morning he kissed his wife, drank his coffee, drove to FBI headquarters, and worked to stop the very thing he had become. His job was to catch moles. And each day, he sat beside analysts who combed through files, desperate to find the source of leaks. The mole who was dismantling U.S. efforts from within. All while the real mole was sitting right there. Some suspected something. Whispers about Hanssen being cold, condescending, socially odd, but nothing stuck. He had no lavish cars, no foreign trips, no affairs, no traceable corruption. The truth was, he was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine because he was invisible. In 1991, he stopped. Disappeared from Soviet contact. Maybe he got spooked. Maybe he needed a break. But during that time, he recentered his life. Went back to church, attended more confession. Spent time with his growing children, but the darkness was still there. Buried beneath the sermons and the station wagon was a man who had killed more operatives than some wars. And in 1999, he returned. This time, not to the KGB, now it was the SVR, Russia's new foreign intelligence service, new flag, same betrayal. He picked up right where he left off. Only now, he wanted more. Bigger drops, bigger payments, and deadlier secrets, and still no one knew. He lived in a brick house in Virginia. He drove a Ford Taurus. He wrote religious articles in his spare time. He even taught Sunday school. But inside the FBI, a storm was brewing. The Bureau had lost too many agents, too much ground. The leaks hadn't stopped, and someone somewhere had to be feeding them. They just didn't know that someone was still sitting at the heart of the building, that the man they trusted to guard America's secrets was the one bleeding it dry. For over a decade, Robert Hanssen had danced in the dark, untouched, unseen, undetected, but nothing stays hidden forever. But here's the twist. They were looking in the wrong place. They believed the leak had to be coming from the CIA. After all, many of the exposed agents were CIA informants in Russia. Their logic seemed airtight. So they began digging, files, surveillance, interviews. They zeroed in on a man named Brian Kelly, a CIA officer with access to sensitive Russian intel. He fit the profile, quiet, meticulous, odd. But he wasn't the mole. While Kelly was being followed, investigated, and harassed, Robert Hanssen was sitting comfortably in his FBI office, sipping coffee, organizing files, and planning his next drop. And in those years after his 1999 reactivation, his espionage grew bolder. He started using encrypted letters. Each time, he would write a new note to the Russians, meticulous, calculated, cold. He signed them Raymond Garcia. In one letter, he bragged, "I have access to virtually everything. It is riskier, certainly, but I am prepared to take that risk." And he wasn't lying. In 2000, Hanssen made one of his boldest drops, leaving a package in Foxstone Park, a quiet spot in Vienna, Virginia, just minutes from his home. Inside the drop, a computer disk, classified documents, and instructions for his handlers. For this, he requested a $50,000 payment. The Russians paid it gladly. The damage? Immense. He revealed an FBI eavesdropping tunnel built beneath the Russian embassy in D.C., a secret operation that had cost the U.S. millions. With that one disclosure, the FBI lost access to nearly every whispered secret it had gathered for over a decade. And Hanssen still walked the halls freely. But cracks were starting to show. One of his colleagues, an agent named Eric O'Neill, freshly assigned to a newly formed information security division, began to notice odd behavior. Hanssen didn't trust computers. He insisted on printed memos. He avoided digital logs. He would carry classified files in briefcases, take them home, and return them, often with papers slightly rearranged. He once disabled all security systems in his office. When questioned, he said he didn't like being watched. He even bragged to O'Neill that the FBI was vulnerable to internal attacks. "If I were a spy," he said casually, "you'd never catch me." It sounded like a joke, until it didn't. Meanwhile, back at FBI headquarters, the task force made a breakthrough. In late 2000, the CIA acquired a file from a former Russian intelligence officer, a file that contained letters, drops, and a fingerprint left behind by Raymond Garcia. When the Bureau ran the print through their system, they got a hit. Robert Hanssen, not a CIA agent, an FBI mole. The revelation was seismic. The Bureau had been looking in the wrong agency for nearly 5 years. While Hanssen was giving away secrets, his own colleagues were chasing shadows. Now the chase became real. They couldn't arrest him yet. He was too careful, too clever. They needed evidence, something undeniable, so they built a trap. They promoted Hanssen, gave him a new office at the FBI's Data Security Division, assigned Eric O'Neill as his assistant. But in truth, the entire office was a stage. Every file he touched was monitored, every move tracked, every word noted. Hanssen, of course, suspected something. He called the office a joke, told his wife he felt sidelined. He was right. But he didn't stop. On February 18, 2001, Hanssen prepared one final drop. He wrapped a trash bag full of classified files and tucked it beneath a footbridge in Foxstone Park. His signal to the Russians? A strip of tape on a nearby signpost. He walked away calmly. He didn't know that just minutes later, FBI agents would move in. They surrounded the area, closed in, and arrested Robert Hanssen without a single shot fired. After 22 years of espionage, over 6,000 classified documents leaked, and several deaths directly caused by his betrayal, the ghost was finally caught. And the Bureau? They weren't just left with shock. They were left with a question. How had it taken this long? February 18, 2001. Robert Hanssen sits alone in an FBI holding room. No cuffs now. Just silence and a mirror he knows isn't just a mirror. The agent who had spent decades hunting others was finally the hunted. When the agents came, he didn't resist. No panic, no anger, just one sentence. What took you so long? It wasn't arrogance, it was honesty. For 22 years, Hanssen had played the perfect double life. FBI agent, devout Catholic, father of 6, and at the same time America's most dangerous traitor. Now that life was unraveling. In the small, gray interrogation room, agents asked him why. Why betray your country? Why risk your family? Why do it so long? Hanssen gave no grand speech. No ideological crusade. His reason? It was never about politics. It was about ego, about power, about money. And it had been about money. Over the course of his spy career, Hanssen had received over $1.4 million in cash and diamonds from Russian handlers. Not flashy, not to buy sports cars or yachts. He hoarded most of it. Hid it, buried it, kept it untouched. It wasn't the wealth that drove him, it was the game. He'd felt invisible, untouchable, smarter than everyone else, until he wasn't. The fallout was immediate. Across the FBI, a wave of disbelief swept through its ranks. This wasn't a junior analyst or an outside contractor. This was Robert Hanssen, a senior agent, a man who trained others, briefed directors, shaped U.S. counterintelligence strategy. Now he was exposed as the mole who had sold the Bureau's soul. But the pain didn't stop at the Bureau's walls. Back home in Virginia, Hanssen's wife, Bonnie, sat in disbelief. She had known something was off: strange absences, odd financial behaviors, unexplained moods. Once years earlier, she had even confronted him after finding suspicious notes. Hanssen told her it was a mistake. He had gone to confession. Promised he would never do it again. She believed him. Now the confession wasn't to a priest. It was to the US government. The files Hanssen had passed on to the Russians weren't just secrets. They were lives. Double agents in Russia had been executed, missions compromised, technology stolen, diplomatic relationships shattered. He didn't just betray his oath. He dismantled decades of US espionage efforts. And all the while, he had shown up to church, taken communion, led Bible studies. One agent later described him as a walking contradiction. But for Hanssen, it was compartmentalized. The sins of Saturday didn't interfere with the prayers of Sunday. Meanwhile, prosecutors debated their next move. The evidence was overwhelming. They had his drops, his notes, his fingerprints, his cash. He could face the death penalty. But Hanssen, even in defeat, still played his game. He agreed to plead guilty on one condition. His wife would continue receiving his pension. His family would be protected. It was classic Hanssen cold logic wrapped in twisted morality. The government agreed. On July 6, 2001, Robert Hanssen stood in a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy. Each count? A separate dagger to the heart of U.S. security. When asked if he understood the gravity of his crimes, Hanssen responded simply, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge asked again, "Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?" Hanssen nodded. "Yes." And with that, the courtroom closed the chapter on America's most damaging spy case. But outside, the consequences continued. Agents combed through every case file Hanssen had ever touched, every meeting, every name, every folder. Thousands of documents were reviewed. Dozens of operations had to be restructured or abandoned. Even after his arrest, he left chaos in his wake. To this day, some of the assets he compromised may still remain unknown, some operations lost forever. And some families, especially those whose loved ones were executed abroad, left with scars no justice could heal. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The deal to plead guilty spared him the death penalty in exchange for full cooperation with investigators and the assurance that his wife, Bonnie Hanssen, would receive his government pension to support their children. He was sent to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, the most secure federal prison in the United States. A Supermax facility designed for the worst of the worst terrorists, mob bosses, and traitors. In 2002, a new inmate arrived. Register number 48551083. Name: Robert Philip Hanssen. His new world was a 7-by-12-foot concrete cell. No windows. No physical contact. 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. There were no more secrets to hoard, no more dead drops to make, just 4 walls and the sound of his own thoughts. Every so often, he was allowed 1 hour of recreation, alone, in a small cage they called the dog run. But for the most part, Hanssen vanished from public view. No interviews, no memoirs, no apologies. He became the ghost of American espionage buried alive in silence. And yet, even behind bars, his name was never forgotten. In intelligence schools, his case became mandatory study. At FBI orientation, recruits were told, "This is the man who fooled us. This is the man we will never let happen again." He wasn't brilliant in the cinematic sense. He used no high-tech gadgets or Mission Impossible stunts. He used stationary, ordinary codes. A dead drop under a footbridge, and that made it worse. He betrayed his country with the same casualness others used to pay bills. But Hanssen's legacy wasn't just about operational damage. It was psychological. He shook the very foundation of the FBI from the director's office to the newest field agent. He exposed the blind spot every institution fears, the trusted insider, the man who knew the system because he helped build it. After his arrest, sweeping reforms were introduced. Internal surveillance tightened. Background checks deepened. The culture of blind trust gave way to necessary paranoia. To this day, Hanssen is still referred to as the most damaging spy in US history. He compromised over 50 human sources. He leaked entire strategies. He traded military secrets. He even revealed the existence of surveillance tunnels under the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. And yet, despite everything, some still ask, why? Was it greed? Yes. Was it ego? Absolutely. But at the center of it all was something simpler. Hanssen liked the game. The thrill of betrayal, the illusion of superiority. He was addicted to the power of knowing something no one else did. And so he stayed in that prison, year after year, unknown to most, unforgettable to a few. Then, on June 5, 2023, Robert Hanssen was found dead in his cell. Natural causes, 79 years old. No final words, no confessions, just the end of a long, cold chapter. There was no public funeral, no national coverage. Just a quiet line in a government file. Case closed. But the shadow he cast? It still lingers. Robert Hanssen's story is not just about espionage. It's about trust. It's about systems, how they rise and how they can rot from the inside. It's about how a man can kneel in church on Sunday and trade lives for diamonds on Monday. He was a father, a husband, a patriot on paper, and a traitor in truth. The man who knew everything and gave it all away. In the end, it wasn't politics or ideology that brought America to its knees. It was one man, sitting in a cubicle, passing notes and choosing himself over all of us.